Hello and welcome to the DVB Newsroom. I'm Nora. Joining me today is Maung Zarni, a genocide scholar from Myanmar and the co-founder of Free Rohingya Coalition, among many other endeavors. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Your last op-ed for DVB English News was called "Myanmar looks more like ASEAN Syria than a democracy in waiting." This was before the fall of Bashar al-Assad. How do you compare the two countries now that Assad was overthrown?
Well, my comparison to start with was based primarily on the internal dismemberment along ethnic and political lines of Syria, which is something that has been happening in Myanmar as well. But the comparison ends there. I think that the external factors that are most crucial in the ouster of Assad regime in Damascus are missing in Myanmar. You know, the post-Syria Assad is not emerging as a democratic federal entity yet. You know, what happens in the Syrian system post-Assad remains uncertain. And by the same token, I think Myanmar's situation remains deeply concerning because what happens in Rakhine State with our Arakan army, the Rakhine State remains, deeply concerning. But across the country, the civil war continues to rage on, on many fronts. Of course, the main, actor that is responsible for the war is the Burmese military. So I think that the Burmese situation is as concerning as, both pre and post Assad Syria.
It's been 4 years since the nationwide uprising to the 2021 military coup began. Are resistance forces able to win, and would they be able to govern the country if Min Aung Hlaing is defeated?
Well, your question has two parts. The first one, as I understand it, is are the anti-Min Aung Hlaing or anti-junta resistance movements winning? I think in terms of territorial control, looking at the number of towns and even the military regional commands, the military outposts that have been fallen into their hands, I think definitely the resistance forces are expanding their territorial control vis-a-vis the Myanmar military under Min Aung Hlaing's commandership. But the other question is a bit more difficult to answer because it's futuristic and it involves, the capacities of the leadership of these organizations and what they are able to do in terms of setting up, the local governing or governance structures. And so those things are very, very complex and they're going to take time. And so I can't really answer a straightforward yes or no.
So you have worked for many years on the non-violent resistance to military rule in Myanmar. What do you think of the governance mechanisms formed by the resistance, including the National Unity Government?
Well, I think in the ethnic, non-Myanmar ethnic nationalities areas, different organizations, they're just, a handful of bigger and most experienced revolutionary or resistance organizations. They have a long tradition or experience. In the case of KNU and KIO, and the same goes with the KNPP. They seem to be doing all right. But I think the problem is not in these ethnic nationalities areas where the majority are non-Myanmar people. The problem is in the heartlands of Burma or Myanmar, the so-called proper Myanmar or proper Burma, where the majority Buddhist and Myanmar people live, like major cities and other, big towns where the military of Min Aung Hlaing seems to be still in control, and the Zagain and other places, so these places are no longer enjoying any type of social services or public health or universities or basic education facilities because of the expanding armed conflicts. And so I think the non-Myanmar ethnic communities under their own ethnic, resistance groups or control or leadership, they seem to be doing better than the majority Myanmar in the dry zone and other places. And so we cannot generalize the situation of general administration or public and social services.
Is the NUG able to gain legitimacy internationally as the representatives of the Myanmar people, even though Maung Line controls state power from Naypyidaw?
No, I don't. I don't think NUG is making any significant gains in terms of it being recognized as the alternative to Myanmar military that has been acting as the representative of the state. Yeah, surely the Myanmar military no longer represents the country or the state or Myanmar's membership at the United Nations General Assembly, and also its not accepted at the level of political representation in the important, ASEAN grouping and its summits, leadership summit and other fora. But the NUG is not able to present itself as the credible alternative for two reasons. One is the NUG is not seen by very important, or I would say the most important external actor for Myanmar politics, namely China. So the Chinese policymakers see NUG as simply a proxy organization for the United States. And so therefore, anything that NUG does appears to be alienating the Chinese sensitivities. And so that is a serious and significant weakness of the NUG. The missteps or miscalculations that NUG leaders are making, instead of trying to win, China to its side, the NUG seems to be doing exactly the opposite, which is trying to align itself or trying to depend on the United States for the democratic resistance in the country. That is very, very disturbing.
Yeah. China seems to have put its full support behind Min Aung Hlaing and his election plan. How do you see the situation from now until November? Will there even be an election?
Well, I think the election is really a way to establish, from the Chinese perspective, some kind of legitimacy and restore some semblance of political stability in the townships and cities that Myanmar military under Maung Aung Hlaing still control, which is essentially the majority Myanmar areas. So I think that China is pursuing essentially two-pronged strategy in terms of keeping its economic and strategic interest in Burma. On one hand, China is clearly of the view that the Myanmar military, not simply Maung Aung Hlaing as the leader of that organization, Myanmar military as a central organization that has been in place for the last 70 plus years since independence in 1948, cannot be dispensed with. In other words, China does not want to allow the central organization of Myanmar, the military, to collapse. And so it's doing everything it can to make sure that central structure remains intact and functional, at least in the main Myanmar majority areas of dry zone and Rangoon and Bago and other places. At the same time, China is also making sure that China border-based ethnic resistance organizations remain friendly to the Chinese interest. And basically, the Myanmar civil war is not good for anybody, and the main winner in this case would be powerful external actors, particularly China.
Aung San Suu Kyi turns 80 this year, and she's been held in prison since 2021. Her National League for Democracy party, which governed the country from 2016 to 2021, has refused to re-register under this regime. Does it matter to the international community?
No, I think that neither NLD nor Aung San Suu Kyi really matters to any international policy. I've supported Aung San Suu Kyi for the first 15 years from 1989 when she became the co-founder of the National League for Democracy until the early 2000s when I realized that she was not providing the kind of ethical, moral, or intellectual leadership that I was looking for in such an important democratic and liberation struggle. So when she went to The Hague in the Netherlands to defend and denied the credible allegations of genocide against our own ethnic community called Rohingya in Western Myanmar, the international community had gone very, very cold towards Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, none of the prominent international players in any sector, corporate or religion or politics or activism or government, is even mentioning her name. And so it's really a sad situation. And she's almost 18, and I think she should be released. But I think that her role in Myanmar politics has pretty much finished. Definitely, her standing internationally, it's non-existent. And so if she's no longer in a position to deliver anything of value to other international actors, so of course, international actors are going to stay silent or remain indifferent to the fact that she remains in captivity 4 years after the coup. And then the other one, this concerns the global civil society. In other words, people around the world, the activists and human rights defenders and whatnot, and Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and as well as other lesser-known international organizations and individual activists, they're not calling for Aung San Suu Kyi's release. They may be concerned that the old lady is in captivity on trumped-up charges by the criminal military, but they're no longer excited about Aung San Suu Kyi because she no longer represents human rights or democratization or liberalism. And so, but she has herself to blame. She made these choices, and as we sleep on the bed that we prepare, and she defended the indefensible, which is the persecution of Muslims and ethnic minorities, as well as and most outrageously the genocide against the Rohingya people.
As I mentioned earlier, you are a genocide scholar. How do you advocate on behalf of the Rohingya, Palestinians, and others who face alleged genocide?
Scholars and activists don't have a lot of power to change the realities on the ground, whether it's talking about Israel committing a genocide, killing 17,000 children. Think about it, 17,000 children in a span of 15 months, and then killing nearly 70,000 civilians, and 70% of them were women and children. Right, that's what Israel has been doing, and both Myanmar and Israel. Historically, I think we need to remember Myanmar and Israel were very, very close because we became independent nation states in 1948. And, the former prime minister or the late Golda Meir described Myanmar-Israel relations as a love affair. The Israeli generals and the founding prime ministers and other leaders of Israel have visited Myanmar since 1950s, well into the 1970s during General Ne Win's time. And the Israeli military and technical companies and intelligence services have very close ties with the Myanmar military. They have trained Myanmar military that have been committing atrocity crimes against different ethnic people, including Myanmar majority. So I think it's really important for us as the people who have been oppressed by the Myanmar military for decades or more than half a century. In the case of Shan and Kachin and Karans, more than 60, 70 years. to see that Palestinian people are not terrorists. They are not fighting the Israel because Israel is made up of Jewish people. They are fighting to free themselves from the colonial oppression, colonial occupation of their country. So we have a similar situation. We fought against British, against the fascist Japan. We are still fighting against the Myanmar military that we see as the main oppressor of our people, irrespective of our ethnicities. So we need to be able to extend compassion and solidarity to the Palestinian people. And I think sadly, and actually I'm rather angry that there are so many Myanmar organizations or others that are fighting for human rights and democracy for their communities, whether it's Karans or Kachins or Chin, but they remain silent when it comes to Rohingya, who are largely Muslim people. We should be indiscriminate in terms of supporting the rights of ethnic people and the human rights of everyone in the country of Myanmar. We should not be discriminatory. If we're discriminating against the Rohingyas and Muslims, well, are we better than the Myanmar military if we are committing war crimes when we capture the enemy soldiers? Then are we better than Myanmar military while we're talking about human rights, democracy, international law, legitimacy? So we have to internalize these values. We have to respect the rights of humans simply because they're humans. And I'm also very unhappy with a lot of ethnic non-Myanmar ethnic and other activists, including Myanmar activists, openly supporting Donald Trump, and and particularly Donald Trump deporting refugees and asylum seekers from the United States. And Donald Trump saying that 2.3 million Gazan people of Palestinians ought to be forcibly deported. Well, that's what we did. The Myanmar did with the Rohingya people. 1 million Rohingya have been forcibly, kicked out of Rakhine State. They've been turned into stateless refugees with no schools, no universities, no future prospect for employment, and no land of their own. That's precisely what Donald Trump said that he wants to do. He wants to kick out 2.3 million Palestinians from Gaza who survived the genocide for 15 months. And so I think that these are signs that I believe are very, very troubling. They indicate that as a society and as a democratic and federalist movement, we might not be ready to show that we are better than the Myanmar military that we are fighting. We have to be better organizations, better human beings than those we fight against. Otherwise, what's the point of civil war if we are going to be behaving like the Myanmar military, discriminating against those who are different from us, who believe in different God, who live in different places? And so I think that the democratic, revolutionary organizations have to have some kind of principles and ideals and respect for human rights. Otherwise, there's no point killing and being killed among ourselves.
You faced a lot of criticism online for being outspoken in defense of the Rohingya and the Palestinians. How do you respond to these critics?
Well, I'm a human rights activist. I'm a scholar. As a human rights activist, I will stand up and speak out for any human community, whether they are Buddhists or Muslims or Kachins or Karans I have spoken out. I'm one of the very first Myanmar activists over the last almost 40 years who openly said all the ethnic groups in Myanmar have the right to self-determination. Right? And if Myanmar majority and the Myanmar military continue to oppress them and kill them, violate them, rape them, take their territories and resources from Kachin or Karan or Chin people, I would support the armed ethnic organizations. I have supported them. I know a lot of leaders of these ethnic resistance organizations. They know I have tried to do everything I can as one person to support their armed struggle. I'm not a nationalist. Secondly, I'm a scholar. If you're a scholar, you are at the mercy of the evidence you find. And then when I studied Rohingya, I found that they were recognized as part of Myanmar. They were recognized as native of Rakhine state. The state is shared between the Rohingyas and Rakhine and Myanmar and other ethnic groups. It's not exclusively for the Rakhine Buddhists. The same way Myanmar is not exclusively for the Myanmar majority. Most of us are Myanmar and Buddhist. That doesn't mean that we have the right to oppress other people. So then I studied genocide with a scholar, a very prominent scholar of Nazi Germany for my PhD. And what I find is that my own country people and Myanmar military and Daw Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD and their supporter, Myanmar media organizations, are all complicit or collaborating in destroying this ethnic community while they don't do anything to break up the Union of Myanmar or to attack people anywhere. And so they're wrongly persecuted. That's why I stand up. And so if you call yourself human rights activist, you cannot discriminate. It doesn't matter whether, you have to stand up for anyone. It doesn't matter whether it's a child, you're defending the children or women or minorities or majority Buddhist, simply because you see, I think Myanmar people need to understand human rights means human rights, the rights of humans. Every human has a right, whether they are criminal or they are illegal in the country, or whether they are migrant workers or they have no documentation living in Thailand or India. Just simply because a person is a human person, it's entitled to safety and protection. And so I think we cannot call ourselves human rights defenders or women's rights defenders if we are unprepared to say that Rohingya women are being raped and that is wrong. You have to stand up for all women or all humans or all men. And so that's my response. You cannot call yourself a human rights activist or a scholar if you're unprepared to live on the principles or act on the evidence that you found as a scholar.
With Israel's war on Gaza and Russia's Ukraine war continuing, how can the international community provide justice for Rohingya and all ethnic nationalities in Myanmar?
Well, I think the international law and international judicial organizations, such as the International Criminal Court, from which the chief prosecutor of ICC is seeking arrest warrant for Maung Zarni and others in the top leadership of Myanmar military. These institutions and the international law, humanitarian and criminal law, are being severely undermined or have been threatened by permanent Security Council members, such as the United States. Instead of supporting effort to strengthen international law and UN organizations, the United States has issued sanctions to go after those who want to uphold the international law. So that is the larger background in which justice and accountability for Rohingya or other ethnic nationalities that have suffered atrocity crimes at the hands of Myanmar military for decades, like Karans and Kachins and Shan women, Chin people. So I think it's very, very difficult for human rights activists and advocates for international accountability to feel optimistic at this point, because at the end of the day, it's not the international law or the United Nations as a multilateral organization that deliver or that make possible international accountability and justice. It is the power of the states that ensure these accountability and justice issues are addressed. When you have the most powerful countries within the international system called the UN, namely the Putin's Russia or the United States, it doesn't matter whether it's Biden or Trump, the United States is a major violator of international norms and international law, and China. So when you have three most powerful veto power holders in the Security Council completely disrespecting international law and disregarding call for accountability for any issue, then I think there is little reason to feel optimistic that we are living in an interstate system of nation states where justice, accountability, and human rights are being pursued or realized. So we are back to the 1930s Europe and Asia, where the big guns controlled the weak and vulnerable communities. So we are basically back to the pre-World War II scenario, where the extreme racist ideologies that we call fascism or far-right ideologies are coming back in vogue in Western liberal democracy, and thankfully in Asia, with the exception of India, we have not seen the revival of this level of extreme blood-based, skin color-based racism across Asia. And so it's what's happening is the so-called democratic Western world that is now fallen prey to extreme right-wing fascist and neo-fascist ideologies. They're starting with the United States and Donald Trump, and then also in Europe as well, Germany, Hungary, France. And so I think we are living in a very, very frightening time. And, I shudder to think as a human rights activist and a scholar of history, what is waiting for us as a human community around the world, not just for the Rohingya.
Thanks very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you very much.